Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review the book Bogart, A Life in Hollywood by Jeffrey Myers. First of all, I'd like to say how much I like the graphic design on this cover. The choice of colors, the overall layout is just very pleasant. And this is a library binding, which is just beautiful. Now, this has a whole lot of information about Humphrey Bogart. And that in and of itself made it an interesting read. However, the delivery of that information was a little uneven in my opinion. So, why do I think it was uneven? Now, anyone who's ever read any news articles written by journalists will know that if the writer can't grab the reader within the first 3 sentences, they've lost them. They're just not going to keep, the viewing audience is not going to keep reading the article. So you have to reach out there and grab the audience and pull them in. Well, you don't have to do that with a book. But every chapter felt like that. I would be interested to see if Mr. Myers actually came out of a journalism background. Because it's like he tried to show you, this is what's going to be in this chapter, and then he filled in the blanks. And you don't need to do that when I'm reading a book. Okay, you've bought me. You've got me. I'm going to read the book. Now, if you don't make it interesting, I'm going to stop reading the book. Bogart's life was interesting enough to keep me going, but there were times when it was difficult. Also, the author doesn't do things in a purely chronological order. So it's basically a chronological order, almost completely. However, every once in a while, he'll get to a certain topic, and he's almost like he'll complete that topic. Then he'll jump into the past to go to another topic that took place prior to what he'd just finished. I think the book would have been much better served if he had just done a straight-up chronological tale. It would have meant that, say, for example, the communist witch hunts of the 50s would have been mixed in a bit more as opposed to concentrating them all at once in one chapter. But that would have put them in the context of Bogart's life much more efficiently. He would have understood where Bogart was when it come to other things in his life that were being affected by these legal cases. As it was, it seemed like a very isolated incident, but it wasn't an isolated incident. It took place over years, and his political involvement really felt isolated into these areas, and he really didn't talk a great deal about how the politics that Bogart had affected the rest of his life, because the politics of who we are part and parcel of the weft and warp of our lives. We can't separate them. And that's what it seemed like he took isolated sections and tried to tell them, and a human being is a holistic entity. If you take the organs out of a human being, it's not a human being anymore. It's just a bunch of organs. And that's very much what this book felt like to me. As though he had dissected Bogart as opposed to presenting a complete human being. It was still interesting, and there was still a lot of information in this book that I really enjoyed. And it's things that I found fairly surprising. For example, I don't know why, but I always just kind of assumed that Bogart had always been from a working man's background, that he was blue collar. But he wasn't. He came from wealth. His father was a surgeon. His mother was the director of a fashion magazine for 20 years. They came from money. Now, they lost some of that money at a later point in their lives. His father died a morphine addict. Not hard to get morphine when you're a surgeon. Interestingly, Peter Lorre was a morphine addict. I didn't know that. And there are times when the author goes into wonderful detail about things. Particularly, he has a fascination with the way Bogart used his facial expressions and his hands. He talks about Bogart's hands a lot, which was interesting insight both into Bogart and into the author. But then there are times when he slips into these very casual colloquialisms, and it's like the entire book just shifts for like 3 sentences. It's like suddenly, it's like you're sitting down and having a beer with somebody as opposed to listening to someone give a speech about Bogart. It was uneven, and that was disconcerting in some ways. So, overall, I felt that the book's uneven nature affected my ability to enjoy it. I will not be reading anything else by this guy. I'm glad I read this book because Bogart's life was interesting. I may want to hunt down some other books written by other people about Bogart to see if I can find something that may have had a better narrative than this book does. A lot of detail on his big films. So if you're a fan of Casablanca, African Queen, the whole 9 yards, all the big hits that Bogart had both in his life and have become classics since then. There's lots of details in this book about that. If you'd like to know about the intimate details of all his marriages and all of his affairs, they're almost always in here too. Bogart just had a lot of those. He had 4 marriages and he had numerous affairs over the years, one of which went for like lasted I think 12 years total. And the way he kind of reconciled these in his own head was kind of interesting to watch. And I don't know if the author really was aware of what he was conveying in that regard. Now, the author's also harshly critical of when Bogart wasn't a great actor. There were sometimes where he wasn't able to convey the role he wanted to convey, and he himself realized this. There are times when I think Bogart thought he had pulled it off a little better than he did, and the author is critical about those. Now, unfortunately, my favorite Bogart movie, We're No Angels, which is my favorite Christmas movie of all time, only gets 3 paragraphs, and the author is somewhat harshly critical about it, so I was a little disappointed about that. I wanted to know some details about that movie. I wanted to know how the whole cast functioned together. I'm a fan of Peter Ustinov, and I would like to know more about Aldo Ray. I need to see if I can find a biography of Aldo Ray. I've read one of Ustinov, and I've read one of Bogart now, so now I need to find one of Aldo Ray. But overall, it was a very interesting book. There's a lot of data in here. This book took me a long time to slog through. It's a pretty decent-sized book. It just seems like it took a fairly long time to read. It wasn't helped by the fact that I had a vacation in that time. I didn't read the book during the vacation. I was doing other things, reading other stuff. So, apologize for my sniffy nose. I can't recommend it. I can't dissuade you from reading it. If you really like Bogart and you want a lot of information, this book has it. If you get a good deal on this book, go for it. If you don't mind an uneven writing style, again, go for it. But I'm going to see if I can find at some point in the future some other books that are written about the topic of Bogart that maybe have a better way of delivering the information. Because how you deliver the information about a topic is often just as important as the information that you're delivering along the way.